everybody. Welcome back to the Eau Rouge podcast with Chris and James. And today we're here to talk about the new Alfa Romeo launch. But firstly, of course, pleasantries must be done. Hello, Chris. How are you today?
Hi there, James. I'm pretty pleased with this car launch. The launch event was just the right amount of bizarre, and the car looks really good. So what more could you ask for from an F1 team?
Perfect balance, really. So I think it's important to say before we get straight into the car and looking at the livery and, of course, the differences in some of the parts that have changed from last year, make sure you hit like, make sure you subscribe. And also turn those notifications on as well, just to make sure that you know every time we drop a new podcast. So with all of that out of the way, let's get started. So Chris and I spoke about this new Alfa Romeo car this morning, rather, when it was launched, and we love it, don't we? We think it's just a really, really pretty looking car.
They managed to do what AlphaTauri couldn't do: invert the colours and make the car look even better as a result. The red on white looks so much better than the white on red.
There's something about it where last season, or maybe the season before, the last couple of seasons, I've always liked the red and white, always have, ever since Alfa came into the sport again. But I think that this season I feel like it's looked a bit blocky the last couple of seasons. There has been this block of red and this block of white, and all they've done is really invert the colors, like you said, and have changed maybe some of the workings on the livery. And actually, I just think this looks more modern. I think it just looks smooth and sweet, and I think that's great. And as I've mentioned in the last couple of podcasts, to me, I like cars that stand out. I like cars that make themselves known on the grid, and I think that this car is certainly one of those. So let's dig into the real specific changes. Then we want to do a bit more of a deep dive into these things, because the changes that each car has, or each team has been making so far, they've been quite small but very, very significant, obviously. So Chris, let's talk about the front end then. Obviously there's been a big change to the nose. It's narrower, and also there's a few changes on the kind of the front wing attachment there, where they used to have the nostrils last season. It's kind of changed a little bit now. Could you talk us through those changes and, well, talk about their significance as well?
Absolutely. So, given the nature of the budget cap they've put in place for this season, with the 2 token working permission, which means that you're only upgrading 2 points on a car, the notable exception being McLaren because of the new engine, you're seeing relatively similar new cars across the board. The only real surprises are inverted colour schemes in some cases. Compared to AlphaTauri, so McLaren, the work done on the C41 is a bit more noticeable. If you look at it front on, you can see moulding on the front wing. It's less straight and simple, and it's designed to force the air onto the floor and create more downforce in an attempt to reclaim some of what has been lost due to new regulations. Alongside this new increased downforce approach, they've also revised the brake ducts, making them slightly larger and attempting to cool the brakes better, which means on the slower, more technical tracks, such as Monaco or the Nürburgring, you're, in theory, going to see better response because the car can stop more quickly as the brakes remain cooler throughout. So this is a bold statement by Alfa Romeo, who are clearly desperate to move off the bottom. They were pretty poor last year, really, and they're obviously keen to try and escape being bought by Williams Story, allegedly, and putting extra work into the downforce should, in theory, make them more competitive. As if the Ferrari engine doesn't deliver again, they're going to be completely powerless at the fast tracks as it is.
Well, just a quick touch on the Ferrari engine there before we sort of move on to talking about the drivers. Do we know much about the Ferrari engine this year? I think there's been a lot of people at Ferrari saying that for the Ferrari team, they fixed their engine issues from last year that plummeted them to the middle of the pack. But can we foresee any real improvement in the engine within the Alfa Romeo?
It's difficult to say. Ferrari have the advantage of developing the engine themselves, so they can at least react to the engine more quickly because they see the data first. I know that publicly Ferrari have been quite bullish about their chances in 2021. They claim they've resolved the engine issues, but there has been some speculation from people inside the team that the engine issues are not as fixed as they'd like, and that this year is going to be another year of development, in inverted commas, setting the team up for 2022, which will be the last chance saloon for everyone involved, because if you can't get the engine reg changes and the new designs right, Binotto and everybody who's brought with him is surely going to be out.
But that must be what everybody's doing at the moment. They must have 2022 at the forefront of their minds pretty much, because of the sweeping changes that are coming across the board. Maybe not necessarily so much with the engine, because the new regulations, the whole point of them is that they're designed to reduce the dirty air that's left behind, obviously, so the cars can follow each other better. But surely now at this point, the teams are just saying, right, this is a stopgap. Put a car in here that might do okay, and then push on for 2022 so we can actually catch up to Mercedes. So I'm dubious about this Ferrari engine in all the cars that it will be in, actually. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see how they perform this season, and whether what they're saying, I mean, they have to say that, don't they? They have to come out and say our engine is better than last year.
Yes, I don't think there's any choice given to the team when discussing how they're doing for 2021. I don't think they can come out and say, actually, the engine's a load of rubbish. This is a write-off, tune back in next year. Particularly, it has to be said, if you're Ferrari, whose brand is built exclusively around the fact that you are the most successful and most prestigious Formula One manufacturer of all time. So there is always an element of public showboating. The real acid test is going to be in the pre-season when they all take the cars out. If it's looking slow, then it's going to be a very long year for Alfa, for Haas, and for Ferrari. But if they look more competitive, there could be a fight on their hands. They've got a long way to go to catch up to Mercedes, but giving Red Bull a run for their money would make things infinitely more interesting. If Hambok there was Hambok Lek, Hambok Sai, that would be an improvement on last year, surely.
Well, I mean, if they can up their game, I just had this kind of little jump of excitement in my stomach where you might potentially have, I know it's only for second place, but Red Bull, Aston, maybe McLaren and Ferrari could all be competing for that second place. But I think maybe that might be a bit too optimistic on my part. So let's talk about the drivers then, because the lineup is the same as last year with Kimi Räikkönen and Giovinazzi, but Kimi's now moving into this is his 20th year in F1, well, 18th year if you include you don't include the two kind of seasons he took off as a hiatus. But it's been 20 years since he made his debut in Formula One for the Sauber team, obviously now rebranded as Alfa Romeo. He's 41 years old. When's he going to retire? Surely it's this year. Surely this is his last year.
I think that's ultimately going to be dependent on how Alfa do. There are only so many races I think you can trail around at the back doing very little. It got to Ericsson, when he announced at the time, said he was fed up of being at the back of the grid and there was more to life than just watching everybody else race. And this could be the case for Kimi, but he just doesn't seem bothered. He says he'll keep going as long as he finds it fun. And he's been chopping and changing.
He's always said it's a hobby. isn't it? That's all he said. That I do this for fun, and he's still enjoying it.
So, why would you retire? Ultimately, Kimi's one of those drivers whose value to a team is ultimately higher than the cost of hiring him. And if he's willing to drop his salary as he gets older, someone will take a chance on him because he's probably the most popular driver on the grid. He brings a lot of experience to the team. So I think it's his last season when he decides it's his last season. There doesn't seem to be a bumper crop of GP2 drivers with backing, which is what Alfa really need, waiting to step up. So I think the seat is his until he decides otherwise.
It seems that way. He's in control, isn't he, of his own destiny? It's unlikely he's going to get kicked out. But I think that is the question: who is going to replace him? Because you've got. I was having a look at the kind of the Ferrari Young Driver program and sort of the drivers coming through. You've got Callum Ilott maybe, but I think Arthur Leclerc could be the next person to jump into that seat, with the Leclerc family now, entrenched onto the grid, with the brothers driving for each other. You had the Schumachers back in the day, and now with another kind of partnership going on there, with a view to them even imagine if they were becoming teammates in the future. I don't know. I'm just obviously speculating, but actually, who once Kimi leaves, who would be his replacement?
It's I think difficult to say at this point. You imagine if Kimi's thinking of retiring, there'll be whispers later into the season. Arthur Leclerc has only competed in Formula Regional at the moment, so I think he's going to need the season in F3 to prove himself, and that F3 to F1 jump does happen, but will it happen for Arthur? I suppose we'll find out later in the year, but at the moment, I would be surprised if Kimi went anywhere, and Giovinazzi, being a Ferrari driver academy driver, means that he's probably there in exchange for reduced engines, as a lot of the engine manufacturers do now to get their drivers up to speed. So we'll see, which is not a very satisfying answer, but I can't see anybody to speculate about to replace him yet. So
no. Yeah, I mean, of course, everything we say at this moment in time is speculation, because we don't even know how all we know is what the cars look like. So before we go on to talking about Giovinazzi, I was doing just a little bit of research, because, I was looking at Kimi Räikkönen and thinking he is old for a Formula One driver. There's no getting around that, despite how good he may look. But he's still got quite a long way to go to beat the record. Now, I don't know whether this is a well-known fact or not, but this is not something that I knew about when I was just looking it up. So the record for the oldest Formula One driver to take part in a race is Louis Chiron, who was aged 55 years and 292 days. This man was nearly 56 years old when he got into a seat of a Formula One car and drove. He's Louis Chiron. The name might sound familiar to some of you, is who the Bugatti Chiron is actually named after. And he was a Monegasque driver, and he actually won a Grand Prix, obviously before Formula One was structured as it is now. But he actually won a Grand Prix with Alfa Romeo in the late 20s as well. I think it might have been in Marseille, maybe somewhere else. And I just thought that was quite interesting. And in fact, he not only did he then take part in a race at 55 years old, 3 years later, when he was 58 years old, he took part in a practice session in Monaco as well. He just wouldn't, he wouldn't give it up. I'm just picturing somebody like, my dad, who's about that age, flying around Monaco, after having raced for about 40 years previously to that, been through a couple of wars. If you don't know about Louis Chiron, it's really, really interesting person. It's definitely worth looking up. But I thought that would be a nice fact for today.
Yes, the oldest race winner is, in fact, Luigi Fagioli, who won the 1951 French Grand Prix, aged 53 years and 22 days, which is pretty impressive to have won a race in the professional Grand Prix era towards the, how old was Fagioli when he died? He was 54. So I'm willing to bet if I have a look at what happened, it will say that he crashed.
I would
No,
imagine
no, he
so,
did not.
yes. No?
Apparently, Alfa Romeo asked him to give his healthy car to Fangio so that Fangio could win the title, sticking Fagioli with Fangio's car. And Fagioli became so incensed, he retired as revenge. So, Mark Webber, you thought you had it bad. Clearly, you never met Luigi Fagioli.
It's interesting when you look at the oldest, I think the top 10 oldest drivers to have ever competed in a Formula One race weekend. I think it was all during the 1950s. These were like World War II veterans, some of them, who just decided, you know what, I'm just going to drive a Formula One car and see what happens in their 50s. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
The top 9 oldest drivers to score a podium finish were all 1950s drivers. The only one post 1950 was Jack Brabham, who came second when he was 44 years and 107 days at the 1970 British Grand Prix in Brands Hatch.
Well, Kimi Raikkonen's got only a couple of years to catch up that record. So let's move on to Giovinazzi then, because he's a driver who I think I am most interested in and most uninterested in at the same time. Because firstly, my interest in him comes from the fact that he's now 27 years old, and I still see him as a young driver. It's the same as like Romain Grosjean. I remember, I still thought of him as like 22 years old in 2016, when actually he was, pushing 30. He's 27 years old. He's not a young driver anymore. Has he peaked? And if he's peaked, am I being harsh there? Because I was again doing a little bit more digging, and Damon Hill, debuted in Formula One at 33 years old, won his championship 3 years later, 36 years old. And admittedly, that was about 30 years ago. So times have changed since then. But is this the best that Giovinazzi's going to get, really, realistically?
It's hard to say. His career up to this point has been solid but unimpressive. He had a second in Formula 3 in 2015. Then he came second in GP2 in 2016. He took the 2017 season driving 2 races for Sauber before finishing it as a test driver for Haas. And 2018, again, test driver for Alfa before making his debut, the Australian Grand Prix in 2019. He scored 14 points in his first season in what was admittedly a more competitive car and more reliable. He had three retirements last season and only one in 2019. So he's okay, but is he going forward the man that's going to return glory to Alfa Romeo? I'm unconvinced. But then, as we've said already, is there a lack of really exciting prospects that are ready for the step up yet? Does he get 2021 before somebody else comes along and snaps at his heels?
Well, that's the thing. I think that actually he's under no real pressure right now. There isn't really anybody, as we were talking about, who could realistically do a better job. Sure, there might be some younger drivers who maybe seem more talented, who might, one day be better. But actually, when we're thinking about drivers who can come in and do a better job than what he's doing, is that the case? And also, I think it's important to look at it's important to note that he finished on the same amount of points as Kimi Raikkonen last year. And I do think there is a perception where when we look at Kimi Raikkonen, we think he's still driving the wheels off that Alfa, like he's still got it, he's still doing a fantastic job. And Giovinazzi's just kind of bringing up the rear. But then, like I said, last year they finished on the same number of points. They had fairly similar seasons, as you said, in a less competitive car. So it will be interesting to see how long he remains in that seat. But realistically as well, if he wanted to improve his career, where would he go? Because he seemed to think, judging from some of the things I read, he seemed to think he was in contention for that Ferrari seat at the beginning of 2020 when we knew that Vettel was leaving. He seemed to think that he was number 1 or 2 choice to replace Vettel. And really, I can't see it. I couldn't see it. I won't see it.
I think you have to be mindful of the fact that at Ferrari, there is always some sort of internal power struggle going on. And usually, if you are Italian during that power struggle, you tend to benefit. Look at the de-Schumacherification of Ferrari in 2007 under Montezemolo. I mean, look at Prost getting sacked and replaced as well by Ferrari. And I think that Vettel was gone. And I think that the decision to remove Vettel predated any decision on who to replace him. And I think as a Ferrari Driver Academy driver and an Italian with Formula One experience, Giovinazzi felt he was the natural fit. Sainz is a very solid driver, but he's not an inspiring replacement for a 4-time world champion. And I suspect that he wasn't the first choice, although obviously I have absolutely no way to verify that claim. So I can see why Giovinazzi would feel confident that he'd be in with a shout for the seat. But it does seem a little odd given his otherwise relatively unremarkable pedigree. So yeah, it's difficult to decide what to do with Giovinazzi because he's not doing anything wrong. He's actually quite a reliable driver. He's only had 4 retirements in the 2 years he's been racing for Alfa Romeo. So he's brought the car home in points-paying conditions 7 times, which is, as you said, more or less the same as Kimi. Kimi's 2019 season was more successful. There were some unremarkable stints as well. You remember the first 4 points-paying finishes that Kimi scored, but then he only scored points 5 times again during the season. So after beginning in a blaze of glory, it wasn't outstanding. There's only been 2 double points finishes for Alfa Romeo in Austria in 2019 and Brazil 2019. Admittedly, Brazil 2019 saw them come 4th and 5th. Absolutely the best weekend of the team's history. But what do you do with him? What do you do with Giovinazzi? Do you just keep him there? Do you replace him? Is he actually Jesus? These are all unanswered questions.
I think it's certainly something we need to look into. I think that what you want, I suppose, if you're not going to be an outstanding driver, if you're not going to be somebody that is, regarded as highly regarded when you're on the grid, you do not want to come away with a Maldonado type reputation, which he certainly hasn't earned. It's not like we're looking at, Giovinazzi or whatever. He is, this man is reliable, which actually for a mid-table team, lower to mid-table team, isn't that what you want? That reliability. So maybe he deserves his seat for that reason alone. But yes, what do you do with Giovinazzi? It's interesting that you were talking about that Italian connection, of course, that he's got, because when watching the launch for Alfa Romeo, there was plenty of Robert Kubica in there, which was quite interesting.
Yes, I mean, Poland is in the grip of fervent nationalism at the moment. And let us not forget that despite the fact that the team is officially called Sauber Motorsports, it is entered under the name Orlen Alfa Romeo F1, Orlen being the Polish title sponsor. And if you look on their YouTube channel, it's a lot of Kubica heavy content. It's quite clear that the sponsor's preference is to have Kubica in. And it's, let's be honest, in everyone's heart, it's their preference as well. But I think as much as it pains me to say it, because Kubica was a quite incredible talent before his accident, I don't think there's any way that you can honestly say that Kubica should be returning as a full-time driver. I think as hilarious as it was to sit and watch the credits completely obscure Giovinazzi, so it looked like Robert Kubica was the team's second driver. You can't realistically employ him again. He was stunning. I mean, Renault and BMW, he was a brilliant driver. But if you look at his last season for Williams, he scored 1 point in Germany, and the rest of the time he didn't finish. Oh, with the exception of Britain, failed to finish higher than 16th with an average position of 17th. So it's not what you need. Say what you want about Giovinazzi, but at least he scored some points.
Yeah. Well, I think Kubica himself even admits that, he shouldn't be on the grid, or certainly not, in a regular race. I know he really struggled in his comeback season to keep going for the whole season. And now we've got 23 races. I think for him, that's going to be, it's too much. And you're right. This was a man who, I know we're straying off topic a bit here, but I think Kubica deserves it. This man was one of my favorite drivers at the time of the late 2000s, where he came into Formula One, and was part of that BMW car, which Chris and I were talking about the other day. Well, I really loved that BMW car. And he was so fast, so brave and intelligent, I thought, as a driver. And it was a huge loss for F1 when, he had that crash and he couldn't come back. But I agree with you completely. His time has passed, and Giovinazzi, still the man.
But will he turn water into wine for Alfa Romeo this season? That is the question.
You're always asking the most important questions on this podcast, Chris. I think that is fair to say.
The questions nobody else thinks of.
No, that's true. You're here for those kind of questions and any really, really obscure 90s strange F1 teams, one season wonder teams, which I'm sure we'll do a focus on later on in the year.
Be prepared for my Andrea Moda video, because it's coming.
So let's move on to our predictions then for Alfa Romeo this year. Before we get into that, just a reminder of where they finished last year. They finished 8th in the standings last year on 8 points. They were 99 points behind the AlphaTauris last year. Kimi Räikkönen finished 16th. Giovinazzi finished 17th. Both of them managed to get 4 points in the season. So, Chris, where are Alfa Romeo going to finish this year, and where are the drivers going to come?
They're going to do exactly the same as they did last year. They may score a few more points, but I don't see them having caught up to AlphaTauri in front. I do think they'll finish ahead of Haas, because Haas have 2 new drivers. Mazepin is, to put it gently, a fucking lunatic. And no. Schumacher, everybody says this. It is a bit of a cliche. He is a slow starter in new series. He's never gone in there and set the world on fire. Will this be the 1991 Belgian Grand Prix for him? Probably not. So I think that the experience of Jesus and the only man older than Jesus will keep Alfa Romeo comfortably sat in 8th. I fancy them to get to double figures this year. I will say I think the upgraded aero package will give them the ability, when there's been a bit of an attritional race, to get that 9th, get that 10th. But it won't give them the 99 extra points they would have needed this year to catch up to AlphaTauri.
So positions for the drivers are exactly the same? You're going 16th and 17th?
I might say 16th and maybe 18th. I think Kimi's experience will keep him where he is. I fancy George Russell to have a better time this year. I think the Williams will be a sufficiently competitive package to nip him the semi-consistent points finishes that he requires to finish ahead of Giovinazzi even if that doesn't quite translate into the same sorts of finishes for Latifi.
Yes, well, I have to say, I think I pretty much agree completely. I think Alfa Romeo, like you said, I fancy them to get double figures as well this season. I think this car is slightly better. I think that the 2020 Alfa Romeo is the worst car that they have produced since coming back into the sport. And so double figures for them. To not whether they'll actually close the gap on AlphaTauri ahead of them, I'm not sure, but certainly into double figures. And I think it's going to be about the same. I think Kimi will finish 16th again, and I think Giovinazzi is going to come 17th. I really do take on that point about George Russell. He is really improving very quickly, and obviously we'll cover more of that when we get to the Williams launch. But I think that at the moment that Williams car is not going to be quite good enough to match the Alfa in points. And also George Russell does need, I think, a little bit of work on his racecraft. He's got qualifying down. It's just I think he needs to work a little bit on his racecraft, which that race in the Mercedes in Bahrain certainly has helped with. But yeah, I'm going to go Kimi 16th and Giovinazzi 17th.
A safe prediction, I feel. One of the two of us will be proved prescient. Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of the Alfa Romeo launch. So please, once again, just to embed this in your minds, hit like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. And of course, we're going to be back tomorrow for the Red Bull launch, which we're really looking forward to. It's going to be really interesting talking about Sergio Perez, especially, but also, of course, Max Verstappen within that new Red Bull car. So thank you so much for listening once again to the Eau Rouge podcast, and we'll see you all back here tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.